Well, Lynn, I have 5:33 your time. And I know as part of my role, I'm going to commit to getting everybody out of here on time tonight. So we can maybe go ahead and get started. I would like to start by introducing everyone just so that we all know each other and know a little bit about each other. So I'll just maybe go ahead and kick it off. My name's Carrie Weiss, and I am the Water Planning Division Assistant Manager in the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources. And just a little bit about me, I do have a background in water resource sciences. So I obtained my bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I've been with the department now for about 3 years, and I've previously worked for the Department of Environmental Quality. Well, used to be Department of Environmental Quality, now it's Department of Environment and Energy. I actually got my very first start out of college working for one of the NRDs. I worked for the Nemaha NRD as a water resources technician for about 1.5 years. So the NRD system is very near and dear to my heart. And I guess just a couple of housekeeping items. As you can see, I'm working from home this evening. And as some of you have already heard, I have a couple of dogs that really enjoy telling me about what's going on in the neighborhood outside. So I'll apologize in advance for them. If you hear any barking, I'll try to keep it to a minimum. But they're my buddies and they're here. So we'll just hope that they don't hear too much going on outdoors tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lynn. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Lynn Webster, Assistant Manager for the Upper Niobrara White. I believe I know everybody that's participating fairly well. You're looking at me, but I'm in a room with 7 of our directors and 4 staff besides me. So they're participating, but are camera shy, I guess. So that's what I have for an intro, besides just following up with what you have for an agenda here, Carrie.
Okay, great. Looks like we also have Lauren Paul. Lauren, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, ma'am. I'd be Sheridan County Commissioner, but number one, I'm a Sheridan County landowner with a lot of interest in water.
Okay, great. Maybe next up we have, I think on the telephone ending in 3199, is that Keith? Did I hear that correctly?
Keith Mesersmith.
Yes, that's correct. I'm a rancher 13 miles north of Ellsworth, and I've been in cattle most of my life, with the exception of a turn in the service and about 6 years in the feed business.
Okay, great. Thank you, Keith. And then we also have Andy Pedley from the department on the line. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Yeah, my name is Andy Pedley. I'm an integrated water management planner with the Department of Natural Resources. And I'm here to kind of sit in and observe and take some notes and help carry out in any way I can. So.
Great, thank you. And we did have Jerry on the line, but it looks like we may have lost him. So hopefully he'll be able to join us again later on. One other housekeeping item before we get going. I just want to, oh, looks like we got Jerry back. Great. Jerry, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. It just went blank. I've had trouble with my internet, so it might have been that. I don't know. Yeah,
okay.
I'm Gary Underwood from Alliance. Had a feedlot and a farm. I'm now retired. Still.
There he just isn't.
Looks like maybe the connection is not so great. Okay. Well, we'll keep on, and maybe we can send Jerry the materials after the meeting just to make sure he gets everything. So one other housekeeping item before we move on is just to let you all know that we are recording this meeting. That is for note-taking purposes. Andy will be taking notes from this meeting to then distribute out to you guys so that you all have the notes from this, so that and so that we have an accurate record of everything that we discussed at this meeting. And that's just as we move forward with developing the integrated management plan. We have everything in record. So this meeting is being recorded for that reason. So just a brief look at our agenda for the evening. I'm going to go over a bit of background information on integrated management plans, or IMPs, as you'll hear us say pretty often. That's the acronym that we use rather than saying integrated management plan. We'll talk about the existing IMP for Upper Niobrara White NRD. We'll talk about also what is expected of stakeholders in this process. We have a brief goals and objectives exercise to walk through. I will talk a little bit about a stakeholder survey that we will distribute out to you all, and then we'll adjourn for the evening. And so my commitment to you is that we will wrap it up by 7:30 your time, 8:30 my time, if not sooner. So we'll get you out of here on time this evening, I promise. So with that, I'm going to pull up a few PowerPoint slides. And Keith, I believe that Lynn sent out some information in the mail. So if you'd like to follow along, if you got that package.
Yeah, I got a whole packet.
Great. Fantastic. So I'm looking at the PowerPoint presentation for that. And so I've already gone over the agenda. So I'm on to slide 4 now. And this is just to talk a little bit about what the Department of Natural Resources is and what we do. So we have 6 different divisions within the agency. Oops, I advanced my slide and didn't mean to. So let me back up just a minute. Okay. So we have 6 different divisions in the agency, including water planning and integrated management. We have the surface water division, we have the groundwater division, we have floodplain management, and we also have dam safety in our field offices. And so what these divisions do, the surface water division is what handles the permitting for your surface water rights. The groundwater division handles registration of water wells. Of course, the NRDs handle the permitting for that. The floodplain management group is pretty self-explanatory. They handle the floodplain maps for the state. And also work with FEMA and NEMA on flood relief. Our dam safety group goes out and does the inspections on the dams to ensure that they are operating safely. And then our field offices handle the adjudication, or not the adjudication, excuse me, the administration of surface water rights. So if we're in a time of shortage and any users need to be shut off, then that is done through our field offices. And so just to talk a little bit more about what the water planning and integrated management group does, and this is on the next slide for Keith following along. We are the division that works with the natural resources districts on integrated management planning. And we're also the division that works on interstate water compacts and agreements and helps to ensure that those are being met from the Nebraska side of things. So we have a lot of responsibilities in our division that span everything from integrated management planning to working with the other divisions as necessary to ensure that integrated management plans are being implemented, and that we have taken into consideration what the other divisions need to have us to consider as part of the integrated management process. And then also, again, like I said, ensuring compliance with interstate compacts, decrees, and agreements. So moving on to the next slide titled, Why Are We Here? So first of all, the department and the Upper Niobrara White NRD agreed to develop a voluntary integrated management plan, or VIMP, for the portion of the district that does not yet have an integrated management plan. We exchanged letters late in 2017, and it is important to note, and I think most of you are probably already aware, that an IMP exists for the western portion of the NRD already. And so the reason that we're all here this evening is that the department and the district identified you as stakeholders in the basin and we greatly value your input in this process. We honestly wouldn't be able to do this process without you, so we're glad that you're able to be with us this evening for that. And it is important to note that stakeholder involvement is required by Nebraska statute. So I'm on to the next slide, and this is a big, long description of Nebraska Revised Statute 46.717.2. And basically what that says is that the department and the affected natural resources districts have to consult with the stakeholders, and that includes irrigation districts, reclamation districts, canal companies, mutual irrigation companies, and municipalities that rely on water from the affected basin, subbasin, or reach of the stream, and with other water users and stakeholders as we've deemed appropriate. And so some of you have been invited because you're individual water users, or because you have a long history of being water users in the basin. And so we identified that those were important stakeholders to include as well. So that's why we've invited you to be part of this process as well. And then we also have to actively solicit public comment and opinion through other public meetings, and other means. And so it's important to note that at least at one point in time in the future, when we have a stakeholder meeting, we do have to have at least one of those stakeholders meetings be a public meeting. So probably when we're able to all meet in person at some point in the future, then we will have a public meeting at that time. So I'm on to the next slide now. What is an IMP? A plan developed by an IMP is a plan developed by the DNR and the NRD with stakeholder input for the management of hydrologically connected surface water and groundwater resources within the district. And what that is essentially, it's required in areas of the state that are declared fully appropriate or over appropriated, and that's where water demands match or exceed the existing supply. And it may be done voluntarily for other portions of the state. So in Upper Niobrara White NRD, the western portion of the NRD, that IMP was already required because that area is declared as fully appropriated. But we're doing this voluntarily now for the eastern portion of the district. And the same set of statutes essentially apply with some differences. So I'm on to the next slide that says differences between required and voluntary IMPs. A required IMP, again, is for fully and over appropriated areas. Some of the differences that we have in the process is that letters of intent are exchanged for a voluntary IMP. So there's not a designation of the river basin or subbasin or reach as being fully appropriated that triggers that process. Instead, we exchange letters. Usually it's initiated by the Natural Resources District. I think in all cases, in the work that we've done so far, it's been initiated by the Natural Resources District. And then the department sends a response letter to agree to develop the IMP together. And as I said, we did that in late 2017 with the Upper Niobrara White NRD. And some of the other differences include for over appropriated area IMPs is that a basin-wide plan must be developed if multiple NRDs are affected. IMPs for affected districts have to be consistent with the basin-wide plan in that case. And so this applies, for example, in the Upper Platte and also applies in the Republican. The IMP must identify the difference between current and fully appropriated levels of development. And the IMP must adopt an incremental approach to reaching the goals and objectives. And again, that applies in the Upper Platte and the Republican, and not in the area that we're talking about this evening. So just a little bit of IMP statutory history. LB 962 was enacted in 2004, and that required, again, an IMP for areas that were fully or over appropriated. And at that time, there was no mechanism yet for voluntary integrated management plans. Then LB 764 came along in 2010, and that authorized the development of voluntary integrated management plans because the department had a lot of interest at that point in time from other IMP or from other NRDs saying that They saw the benefits of developing an IMP with the department and proactively managing the water resources together. And we had a lot of inquiries about couldn't we develop integrated management plans in these other districts as well? And so that was when LB 764 came along and really authorized that to happen. And then LB 1098 in 2014 established the Water Sustainability Fund and also made those districts that are working on or have integrated management plans eligible for that Water Sustainability Fund. So I'm on to the next slide, and this is just the current status of integrated management plans in Nebraska. And you'll see, again, the Upper Niobrara White NRD, the western portion of the NRD here is where there is an existing and required integrated management plan. This kind of cream-colored portion is where we're working on the voluntary integrated management plan that we'll be talking about this evening. And then just to look at some of your neighboring districts, the North Platte NRD, again, is included in that Upper Platte portion of the state that is over appropriated. And so they have a required IMP, but then the Upper Loop, for example, is not fully appropriated, and neither is the Middle Niobrara NRD. And the Upper Loop has an integrated management plan that has been developed and adopted with the department. The Middle Niobrara NRD, interestingly enough, just today, our director signed an order to adopt the IMP for that district. And so that will go into effect in December. So we'll be concluding that IMP process that we've had going on in that district for several years. So just to give you an example of some of the various plans that are going on or exist throughout the state. So I'm on to the next slide. And that's just talking about developing a voluntary integrated management plan. So there are several components of a voluntary integrated management plan that are required. And those include the very clear goals and objectives that have a purpose of balancing water uses and supplies so that economic viability, social and environmental health, safety, and welfare can be achieved and maintained for the near and long term. And so the goals and objectives are one thing that we'll start to talk about this evening. We also have to have a map that clearly delineates the geographic area that the IMP applies in. And we also have to have at least one groundwater control and at least one surface water control. Now, the term control can sound a little bit aggressive, but I want to emphasize that there are a lot of different types of controls that can be put into place. And so examples can be allocations, well spacing requirements, metering, limiting irrigated acres, or it could be as simple as educational requirements. Could be just increased monitoring and enforcement of surface water use, could be limiting new appropriations. And so there's lots of different controls that can be put into place. They don't necessarily have to be scary or aggressive. But we do have to have at least one groundwater control and at least one surface water control within the IMP. And then we also have to have a monitoring and evaluation plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in the next few slides. So I'm on to the next slide that kind of looks like half of a pyramid. And you'll see that, really what we're trying to, oops, excuse me, I advanced too far, so I'm going to back up just a second. Really what we're trying to illustrate here is that we start with basic and sound science as part of our process to build upon the science into the planning and public participation process and then to go into implementation. So really at the very base of all of this would be the hydrologic models, data, and analyses that we have. And so this includes the modeling work that we do. This includes the data and analyses that we have through, for example, our Insight web portal and other data and analyses that we collect throughout the IMP implementation process as well. And we use that to inform where we are with water supplies and water uses, And from that, we can determine where there's water available and where there may be shortage of water. And so we use all of this information then to inform planning and public participation. So the stakeholder involvement process is really the base of that. And that's where we are right now this evening. We use that to help us develop the goals and objectives for integrated management planning, which we'll get to as we move forward in the stakeholder process. And then we use that to inform our strategic planning actions and to develop water management projects. So I'm on to the next slide. Why do a voluntary integrated management plan? Well, there are several good reasons. One of those is that it's just better planning to prevent a fully appropriated status. And so that's to help us manage water resources so that we're not getting to the point where we are using all of the water that's available or overusing the water that's available. So this is really a proactive approach to water management. We find that it's really important that we have that local buy-in from the stakeholder process that leads to more effective water management. It does make makes the NRD eligible for the Water Sustainability Fund, and there's lots of great projects that have come out of that fund. Another good reason is that it is a multifaceted education process. You know, the same as we are presenting information to the stakeholders, we are learning from you about the issues that are most important to you to be addressed throughout this process. So it is multifaceted. And again, this is a flexible process, and a term that you'll hear us use pretty often is adaptive management. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in this next slide that talks about implementation of an IMP. So we start by developing the goals and objectives. As I said, that's an important part of the stakeholder process. And that really helps us to determine the action items that we're going to put into the voluntary integrated management plan. And then that monitoring program comes in. That's where we track various pieces of data in the district. And that helps to tell us whether we're meeting those action items and whether we're helping to meet our goals and objectives as part of that. So that is where that monitoring comes in. And then evaluation. Are the action items actually achieving the desired goals? Are water supply and demand changing? And have the goals changed? And do they need to evolve as we go into the future? And so that's where it becomes adaptive management, because as we go through monitoring and evaluation, that helps to inform us, especially on this point, have the goals changed? And if they have, we may need to come back up and develop some new action items to implement as part of our integrated management plan. So there isn't an existing integrated management plan, as I've mentioned a couple times now, for the Upper Niobrara White NRD. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to let Lynn talk a little bit about that as well. So just a bit of the history of what has been done. Again, there is a portion of the basin that was determined to be fully appropriated, and that was in 2004. And LB 962 came about and required the IMP to be developed for fully appropriated basins. And LB 962 also established the process for developing IMPs. And again, because that portion of the basin was determined to be fully appropriated, that IMP had to be developed. And so that was developed for the western portion of the NRD and was updated in 2011. And so I'm going to let Lynn talk about a bit more of the history as well.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. I'm going to keep this fairly short. I know the majority of the folks attending have heard about some of this previously, but just to go back to kind of the beginning of our integrated management planning, we actually started that in 2002. At that time, it was called a joint action plan. The NRD did initiate with a request to the department to do a joint action plan, which would take a look at that hydrologically connected waters within our district. As stated, it was in 2002, so we were working through that process, implemented a moratorium on high capacity wells in the district in 2003. It was the only way at the time that the districts could implement or halt high capacity well drilling is going through the joint action planning process. So that did occur, and then in the process of doing that, then as Carrie had said, the LB 962 was passed in 2004, and it was a restructuring of the rules, I guess, for the process that we had to go through from the LB 108 joint action plan to integrated management plans. And so initially the entire district was fully appropriated because we were had initiated the joint action plan. So when LB 962 was implemented, the entire district was fully appropriated. The department, through their analysis and determination, determined that only a portion of the district is fully appropriated. So that's what part of the reason why we have the planning that occurred for only part of the district. There's some other things that occurred in that process with part of the lower Niobrara Basin becoming fully appropriated, and then that was reversed by court action. But the main part of this background is the board had heard about and discussed with constituents the fact that there's some issues. We do have some groundwater declines in part of our district that do or have the potential to impact stream flows. So it was a concern for the board, and that's why we worked down that process. Developed an advisory committee for the board, which some of you sat on that previously. And we took the full 5 years to get that plan done from 2004 to approved in 2009. There's some history with how that planning process was occurring. It was brand new for everybody, and was really driven by some of the other compacts, decrees, and some of the over appropriated status that had been determined in the state. So we kind of got thrown into a little bit of that and really took our time to try to make sure what we were doing was correct. We did have some rules and regulations that were part of that initial plan. And as the slide indicates, and this is where I'm going to kind of finish up, we amended that plan with the department, extracted those rules from the IMP, and our rules and regulations are strictly part of our groundwater management area that is entails the entire district. So that's kind of a really quick background of joint action, integrated management, some of the stuff that occurred in between. And I'll quit with that, Carrie, unless anybody has specific questions.
Okay, that's maybe a good point to pause and just see if there are any questions over anything that we've presented so far. Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and talk about what's expected of stakeholders, because I think that's important ground to cover this evening. So first of all, oops, I keep doing that, sorry. We'll go back to the first slide after that that talks about the stakeholder role in voluntary integrated management plan development. So the first thing that we look for from the stakeholders is that you'll convey to us the local water concerns and solutions that you have for those concerns, that you'll help guide the development of goals and objectives for the integrated management plan, as I've mentioned a couple times. We also look for you to help us disseminate information to others, to local groups about the voluntary integrated management plan. So as you're having coffee in the morning with your friends, if you're still doing that, or talking to your neighbors about the process, help us to disseminate the information about what the process is and what we're developing for goals and objectives for the plan. And then finally, we do expect everyone to attend meetings as much as they can, and to do the homework that we do assign. We have a little bit of homework for you this evening as well, and I'll talk about that in a bit. The roles of the NRD and the Department of Natural Resources in voluntary integrated management plan development are to acquire and disseminate the information and data needed for the stakeholder process. So as you have questions that come up, or just other information that you need for us to get for you, that is one thing that we are charged with doing. We will also help you formulate the goals and objectives, putting those into action items that are specific and measurable for us to carry forward in the IMP. We help to facilitate the stakeholder meetings, and then we coordinate with each other and with the stakeholders throughout the voluntary integrated management plan process, help determine and convey feasible actions for the plan implementation. And again, that's the specific action items that we've talked about a couple times. And perhaps the most consuming chunk of the work that we do is that we'll write the voluntary integrated management plan together. So that's just a bit about what we do. Now I have moved on to the timeline. So this is the table that says, that provides the development timeline for voluntary integrated management plan development. So we've been in the planning process. We've actually been in that planning process for this for some time. As you'll recall, we were originally going to have this meeting back in February or March. We had some problems with weather, and then we've had the problems with COVID. And so that's how we ended up having the meeting this evening instead of back in February as we had originally planned. So we have been in the planning stages for this process for some time. But you'll see then that for the stakeholder meetings, we're talking about doing a series of 3 to 4 stakeholder meetings over the next year, basically. So out through August of 2021. And again, we'll have 3 to 4 meetings in that time. We expect each meeting to last about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it's not a huge significant chunk of time at any given time, but we do expect to have about 3 to 4 meetings during that time. And then we'll have a last stakeholder meeting probably about a year from now, when we've gotten through the point of having drafted the VIMP, and to the point where we're ready to take your feedback on it at that point. Again, we expect that to be about a year from now. And then there's some logistics that we have to go through. The NRD and the district and the department will exchange letters and have a hearing on the IMP, and then we'll exchange letters again to reach final agreement. And so that whole process takes about 4 months. Then we adopt the orders and the controls, and that takes a couple of months. And then finally, the IMP would be effective. We think on our current trajectory that we'd be looking at probably April or May of 2022. So that just gives you a rough idea of the timeline that we're expecting for development of this plan. So to talk a little bit about goals and objectives as a starting point for the IMP, I have a couple of handouts, and I'm going to, give me a second here, end my slideshow and go to those handouts. So the first one, if you're still following along with this, Keith, the first one that I'm going to look at, great, thank you. The first one is just the Upper Niobrara White Integrated Management Plan Summary. And I'm actually going to look at the second page of that under where the heading says Goals and Objectives. And so this just summarizes what the goals and objectives are that are listed in that existing IMP for the Upper Narborough White NRD for the western portion of the district. And so the goals are to manage surface water and groundwater supplies in the fully appropriated portion of the district to be in balance with uses so that the existing domestic, agricultural, environmental, recreational, commercial, and industrial activities are preserved to maintain the economic viability, social and environmental health, safety, and welfare of the district for both the near and long term. And so that pretty much comes right out of statute, what's required for IMPs. That's identified as a key goal of the IMP in this case. The second goal is to manage surface water and groundwater in an equitable manner. And the third goal is to maintain Nebraska's compliance with the Wyoming-Nebraska Compact on the Upper Niobrara River. And I'm not going to read the rest of that because that just talks about when it was adopted and ratified. But so those are the goals that are listed in the current IMP for the western portion of the district. And so we think, you know, that might be a good place to start for goals for the voluntary IMP, but we have some other goals and objectives that we can look at as well. And so Keith, this is going to be the next handout is going to be the one titled Examples of Goals and Objectives from Existing Voluntary Integrated Management Plans. And that just lays out some of the different types of goals that move my Zoom controls here. Give me just a second. Okay. That just lays out some of the different types of goals that we have in some of your neighboring districts. And so we have goals that are related to data. We have goals that are related to development. We have goals that are related to conflict prevention and resolution. And we have goals that are related to education and outreach. And so these are just some examples of those. And just to give you an idea, not to make you seasick as I'm scrolling up and down this document, but just to look at goals related to data. An example of that is that we would develop and implement processes for the adequate collection of hydrologic and other related data to assess water resources within the district. That we would develop and implement information gathering and monitoring processes of hydrological and other related data to assess water resources and uses within the district using the best available information, data, and science. Just a couple of examples of data related goals. Goals related to development, for example, would be to develop systematic approaches for the development and sustainability of water resources within the district. We might say that we want to maintain water supply and protect to the extent possible existing uses, the local economy, social and environmental health and safety, and recreational uses while allowing for growth and changes in use. Those are a couple of examples of goals related to development. Then we might look at goals related to conflict prevention and resolution. And one example there would be to prevent, resolve, and minimize water-related conflicts among and between surface water and groundwater users. And then we might have goals related to education and outreach. For example, to develop, expand, and provide educational opportunities and outreach materials about hydrologically connected surface water and groundwater and water conservation. So these are just some examples of goals. And you'll see on the right-hand side of that handout, there's also some objectives that would relate to those goals. And those, the difference between a goal and an objective is that the goal might be the overarching vision for what we want to do, whereas an objective is a bit of a milepost along that journey. And then the action items, again, are those very specific and measurable things that the department or the district will do to help reach that goal. So I have just a few questions for you to think about. And let's definitely have conversation on this. So first, I'd like you to consider what kinds of goals do you think are most important to have addressed in the IMP? And I'm going to stop talking right now and let anybody answer this if they would like to. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and give us feedback on that, what do you think is the most important kind of goal to address in the IMP?
Gary, Lauren, Paul, I have a question. I don't have access to those hands out. Were they supposed to be mailed to us?
Lauren,
Um,
excuse me, Lauren, those did not get mailed, but we will follow up and everybody will have
Okay,
a packet of this information.
okay. Well, I thought maybe I missed something at the mail, but yeah, we don't have those handouts, so we're just following along on the screen. Thanks.
sure thing. And yeah, we'll get those emailed out after the meeting as well. So any thoughts about the kinds of goals that you think are most important to address in the IMP? Should we, do we really need to think about data? Do we really need to think about development? Do we really need to think about conflict resolution? Do we really need to think about education and outreach? Or is there something else that we haven't even talked about that we really need to consider?
This is Keith. I want to be sure that we're doing things that are true and the science behind it is right. There's some real question in my mind how much our water is connected to the Box Butte County water. And then I've got a situation north of me where they're irrigating with 2 pivots. And instead of lowering the water table on a lake that's beside it, the more they pump, the higher that lake gets. And then on my place and other places, it would do me more good to irrigate by taking surface water off of our meadow and instead of pumping water out of a irrigation well. That ground that we would uncover is way better and more productive ground than what's under our irrigation system. I think
Okay.
that's about all I need to say.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Those are all great points. Sounds like we really need to make sure that we've got sound science behind what we're doing and that we
Right.
have good data to back it up. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, Lauren, Paul, I have a comment. I think our NRD has vast differences from west to east and from north to south. And south and east of us in the last 2-3 years, the groundwater has been coming up and coming up. And what I see is it's not fully appropriated, but yet those people that haven't been able to access groundwater to add some irrigation to their farms still can't. And I think that would relate to that increasing groundwater. And I think if you tied those to allocations as they might become needed, you could allow more of that groundwater to be used for crop production.
Okay,
That'd be all I'd have at the moment.
okay, great.
In the last 3 years, we have been starting to let some irrigation go back into your district.
Just
Area three.
sub area 3 though.
Yeah, sub area 3.
Which that's not where Lauren's talking about.
Well,
Yeah, he's referring to sub area 2 and we've had discussions about how do you go from one phase to another, and the board will continue those discussions. There's just not anything in place right now to implement that, but Lauren do know that it has been discussed, and I know the board will continue to have those discussions.
Okay. Other thoughts on specific kinds of goals that we ought to address in the IMP, or any of the categories that we talked about that might be the most important ones to make sure that we capture? Okay. So the next question, and again, Lauren will send this out to those of you that participated over the Zoom. The next question was, of the examples that were
Thank you.
provided. Yes, go ahead.
I just said thank you.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay. So the second question was, of the examples provided, are there one or two that you think are close to capturing what you'd want to have as a goal? So as you have time to look over that handout and think some more about it, maybe there's one or two goals that we've used in other IMPs that are really close to what you would like to see. And we can certainly, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can certainly recycle some of those ideas. So that would be perfectly acceptable. Then the next question is, do you have any other goals for the IMP that don't relate to data or to development or to conflict prevention and resolution or to education and outreach? And I definitely would like to leave this question open for consideration right now. Is there anything that we've not talked about that is really on your mind as an important thing that needs to be addressed in the IMP? So I'm going to let anybody talk to that one. Okay. Hearing none on that. So the last question that we have for consideration really is, who else should you discuss these goals with, and what do you think they might think about it? So, is there anyone you can think of that should be involved as a stakeholder that we don't necessarily have at this meeting? Is there a neighbor or a friend or a coworker or somebody who might have a good bit of information that they could share with us, or thoughts that they would have that we should definitely include as a stakeholder in this process?
I think at least one county commissioner in there.
Okay. I heard county commissioner.
Well, there would be one of us at the moment, so I'm a county commissioner in Sheridan County.
Okay. Any others that you can think of, or any groups that should be represented that we haven't considered? I know we sent an invitation to the Game and Parks Commission, to Bureau of Reclamation, trying to think of others, Lynn.
Was the Mirage Flats Irrigation District?
Yes,
To Marsh Flats, yeah.
they were invited. There's a whole host of folks that were invited that were unable to participate tonight, it looks like, but I think we covered, at least by invitation, everybody that were required. And I know I talked to a few people that said they may or may not be able to make it, but we obviously will keep them in the loop with all this information, so they can stay up to date. Hopefully can participate at the next meeting.
Yeah, Lauren here. I'm sure, Lynn, that the municipalities have been invited.
That is,
As they, yeah, I would assume that was true. So,
yeah,
thank you.
every one of them. Well, we specifically invited every municipality in the area. We didn't reach out directly to Alliance or Hemingford, some of those that are in a different area, but all the ones in the area there, Lauren, were invited.
Thank you.
Okay. Other thoughts on additional people that we should invite as stakeholders?
I only have an FYI, and it talks about whether we can market groundwater outside of the state. And the reason I mention that is we have a bottled water plant south of town has been not doing anything for a couple of years. They did bottle some water early on, and I think it's changed ownership. But I noticed there's been quite a little activity around there, and I don't know exactly who those people are, or if they should be involved in this whole process, because it would appear that, and there again, I'm guessing, but it would appear that they're getting ready to maybe try to bottle water and retail it. But I don't know that to be a fact, but it's an awful big building and costs a lot of money. So I think they got to use it for something.
So I can share a little insight on that. To my knowledge, it's the same ownership. They just changed they went under, changed their name, and are trying to regroup. And I do believe that their intent is to bottle water at some level in the future. My discussions with them really have revolved around the volume. They may be able to do what they want to with an unregulated well. And so that's one option that I know that they may be looking at. There are some exceptions within our rules for industrial use or commercial use, which would fall under that, where they would be monitored and tracked just like a community would be. And if there was, once the baseline is actually set for them, or we recognize a baseline for the amount of water that they have pumped or will pump, if there's a variation from there, then they would be required to provide an offset for whatever that use would be over, as it stands now, 25 million gallons annually. And that's something that was determined a long time ago, I guess, from the process of 962 and the integrated management planning. So we are aware of it, trying to figure out. I have had a discussion with the local guys, because the folks that really own it are absent from the area. And so we're at least aware of the potential. I have requested a face-to-face with them when it's convenient to go through all this. It's been, I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this, but they did bottle water for just a little bit. Their management was hit or miss as to who was there and who they had hired and who they didn't. And some of their records appear to have disappeared. So we're working through getting back in touch with all that. So, and it is interesting, and Carrie can chime in on this if she wants, or my understanding with water transfers, once you put it in a bottle, and then it is a different type of product. It's not like a pipeline going from one spot to another. You put it in a bottle and put it on a truck, and it's administered differently than a pipeline or a irrigation system, those sorts of things with that commercial type use. So I hope that helps a little bit, Lauren, on that, but we'll have to stay in touch on that.
Well, it helps a lot, Lynn, and I appreciate that. But I do think when we're looking at this whole system, that if you can, and I don't know that that's true, but if you can change the water container and therefore not violate the transfer water out of state, we should look at that rule again, or, have some, that could be maybe regulated a little different. If you can just change the containers shape, size, and then move it anyway. So anyway, thanks, Lynn. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch on that for sure. And I'll follow with Carrie some more. When that initially started, there was a different folks I was working with at the department on that, but we'll gear up so that we can make sure we can answer those questions accurately for you. I don't have anything else on this part. Anybody? Here?
Okay. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. That's great feedback so far. So I will keep a note of all this. And as I said, Lauren, we will send this out to you and to the others who were who we had emails for, but who maybe for whatever reason were not able to participate this evening. We'll continue to gather that feedback. So that's all I have for the handout. So going back to the presentation, I think I just have one more slide or maybe two to cover. Yep, just one more. So sorry, I keep advancing that slide and I don't mean to. And I did it again. Trying to move my Zoom controls out of the way. One more time. Okay, so again, in summary, IMPs are developed to manage hydrologically connected surface water and groundwater resources in Nebraska. And again, this is a proactive approach in areas that are not fully appropriated. So that's where we have voluntary IMPs. The existing IMP for Upper Niobrara White NRD, and that's for the fully appropriated portion, was developed partially in response to LB 962 and the fully appropriated designation. It was updated in 2011. And finally, stakeholders, again, are an essential part of the IMP development process. We really appreciate you being here. We're expecting you to help us engage others, to convey local concerns to us, and to prepare for and attend these meetings. So I really do appreciate that you've done that this evening. With that, I would just ask if you have any other questions about the process or about how we move forward from here. Okay, hearing none, I am going to close that presentation out. I've got the stuff recorded on the questions so far, so we'll just go back and take a quick look at our agenda. So we've talked about goals and objectives a bit. So the next thing that I have is that I do want to mention that we have a survey that we'll ask you all to take. This is an online survey, so I don't know, Keith, we can probably send you a paper copy if that's your preference.
Okay, yeah, I would.
Okay, so let me make a note of that, we'll send a paper copy to you. We'll do that. And really the purpose of the survey is to just check in with everybody as we start this process and determine you know, what everyone knows about the IMP development process, if anything, at this point in time, what attitudes people have about the process and what attitudes they have about the agencies that are involved. So that would be our agency and that would be the NRD. And then we also look for opinions on or looking for your feedback on your fellow stakeholders, just to get a sense for, you know, where we are kind of taking the temperature, if you will, as we get started with the process. And then we do the survey again at the end of the process to see, you know, were we successful in educating you all about IMPs? Were we successful in helping to establish trust in the process and trust in each other and those kinds of things. So that's really what that survey is all about. Helps us to stay informed and keep doing a better job as we move forward with IMPs, both within your district and as we work throughout the state. So I'll just thank you in advance for completing that survey. Lauren, we'll send that out to you as an email link. And Keith, we will send you a hard copy. And I will say that your responses are totally anonymous. They all go to the University of Nebraska Public Policy Center, which is who we work with on those surveys. They aggregate the results so that we don't know what any one person said. We just know what the overall aggregated results are. So you please be as honest as you care to be about that process. With that, I don't have anything else on our agenda for the evening, so I'll just look to Lynn to see if there's anything else that you would like us to cover.
I don't have anything from our end. Anybody here have any comment? I think we're good, and we'll move forward with the process, obviously, and maybe the next time we meet, we can be face to face.
Yes, let's hope so.
My only comment is I want to thank you for allowing me to be a stakeholder and participate in this. It's kind of dear to my heart, and water is, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. We couldn't do it without you.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I promised to get us all out of here on time this evening, and it looks like I'm going to be able to give us all about an hour back. So with that, I just want to say thanks again. And we will look to set up another stakeholder meeting, hopefully in the near future, and hopefully we can all be together in person for that one. And with that, I will bid you all good night.
Thanks all.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.